In a small, peaceful town surrounded by lush green hills and winding dirt roads, life moved at a slow, predictable pace. The townsfolk knew each other by name, and everyone had their own routines. Among them was an elderly man named Harold, who lived in a modest house on the edge of town. Harold wasn't particularly remarkable. He was just another face in the crowd to most people. But those who truly knew him understood that his greatest treasure wasn't material wealth or worldly success. It was Max, his loyal dog. Max wasn't just any dog, he was a scruffy golden-brown mutt with expressive eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the world. Harold had adopted Max as a puppy over 10 years ago when he found the little pup shivering in a cardboard box by the side of the road. From that day forward, the two became inseparable companions. Max followed Harold everywhere, to the grocery store, to the park, even to the mailbox. If Harold sat on the porch reading the newspaper, Max would curl up at his feet. If Harold worked in the garden, Max would dig alongside him, though not always in the right places. The bond between Harold and Max was something the whole town admired. Neighbors often joked that Max understood Harold better than anyone else ever could. He seemed to know exactly what Harold needed without being told. On cold winter nights, Max would nuzzle closer to keep Harold warm. When Harold stubbed his toe or dropped something heavy on his foot, Max would tilt his head sympathetically as if saying, "I'm here for you." Even children loved visiting Harold's house because Max was so friendly and playful. His wagging tail and joyful bark were enough to brighten anyone's day. But one fateful morning, everything changed. Emily, Harold's niece who lived out of town, received a call from the local hospital. Her uncle had suffered a sudden heart attack and passed away peacefully in his sleep. Shocked and heartbroken, she immediately booked a flight to attend the funeral. When she arrived, she saw how deeply the loss affected the community. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers came to pay their respects. Everyone spoke fondly of Harold, how kind he was, how generous, how much he cared for his dog. Max, however, wasn't coping well with the loss. Without Harold, he seemed lost, wandering aimlessly around the house as if searching for his master. At night, he whined softly, refusing to eat or sleep. The once energetic dog now looked like a shadow of himself. Emily tried her best to comfort him, but nothing seemed to help. She couldn't blame him. After all, Max had spent nearly every moment of his life with Harold. Losing him must have felt unbearable. On the day of the funeral, the atmosphere was somber. The church was filled with mourners dressed in black, exchanging quiet condolences. Outside, the sky was gray, matching the mood perfectly. After the service, the procession made its way to the cemetery where Harold's coffin was placed under a canopy ready for burial. Max walked beside Emily, his leash slack in her hand. But as they approached the casket, something strange happened. Max stopped dead in his tracks, his ears perking up. Then, without warning, he began barking loudly, tugging at the leash as if trying to get closer to the coffin. At first, no one paid much attention. Dogs bark. It's what they do. Many assumed Max was simply confused or upset because he sensed Harold's absence. Others thought he might be mourning in his own way. But as the minutes passed, Max's behavior grew more intense. He barked, continuously, pacing back and forth in front of the coffin. His sharp, insistent barks echoed through the silent cemetery, drawing curious glances from the mourners. Some tried to calm him down, offering gentle pats or soothing words, but nothing worked. Max wouldn't stop. Emily watched her uncle's dog with growing unease. There was something about his behavior that didn't feel normal. It wasn't just sadness or confusion. It was almost as if Max was trying to tell them something important. She knelt beside him, gripping his collar firmly. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, staring into his wide, anxious eyes. For a brief moment, Max stopped, barking, and looked directly at her, his gaze piercing and urgent. Then he resumed his frantic barking, louder than before. The scene was unsettling, but Emily shook it off, chalking it up to grief. She led Max away, tying him to a nearby tree so he wouldn't disrupt the ceremony further. As the pastor delivered the final prayers, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Max's behavior lingered in her mind, gnawing at her thoughts. Why had he acted so strangely? Was it possible that he knew something the rest of them didn't? When the service ended and the pallbearers prepared to lower the coffin into the ground, Max started barking again, this time with renewed ferocity. He pulled against his leash, straining toward the coffin with such force that the rope dug into his neck. Emily rushed to calm him, but his intensity only increased. Finally, unable to ignore it any longer, she turned to the funeral director and asked hesitantly, "Could we open the coffin? Just one last time?" Her request drew shocked reactions from the crowd. Opening a coffin after the service was highly unusual, almost taboo. People murmured among themselves, some shaking their heads disapprovingly. "It's already closed," one woman said gently. "There's no need to reopen it." Another added, "He's at peace now. Let him rest." But Emily persisted. Something deep inside her, a gut feeling she couldn't explain, told her it was the right thing to do. Reluctantly, the funeral director agreed. As the lid of the coffin creaked open, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Inside lay not Harold, but the decomposing body of a complete stranger. The room fell silent, save for Max's low growl. Horror washed over everyone's faces as they realized the horrifying truth. Harold's body was missing. For a moment, nobody moved. The air felt thick, suffocating. Then chaos erupted. Mourners began talking over each other. Panic spreading like wildfire. Who was this person? Where was Harold? And why had his coffin been switched? Amidst the commotion, Max stood still, his eyes fixed unwaveringly on the open casket. His earlier barking hadn't been grief or confusion. It had been a warning. Somehow Max had known that the body inside wasn't his beloved master. As the authorities were called to investigate, Emily couldn't help but marvel at the dog's instincts. How had Max sensed the difference? What did he know that humans had missed? One thing was certain. Harold's death was far more complicated than anyone had imagined. And Max, the loyal companion who refused to leave his master's side, might hold the key to unraveling the mystery. The discovery of the stranger's body in Harold's coffin sent shockwaves through the small town. What had started as a somber but straightforward funeral turned into a scene of confusion and horror. Mourners stood frozen, their faces pale with disbelief. Some clutched each other for support, while others whispered nervously, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. The air was thick with tension, and even the wind seemed to die down, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Emily, still, reeling from the sight of the decomposing body, felt her stomach churn. She stepped back instinctively, her hand covering her mouth. Max, however, didn't move. He remained planted firmly by the coffin, his growl low and steady. His eyes glimmered with an intensity that made Emily shiver. It was almost as if he was guarding something, or someone. She knelt beside him again, placing a reassuring hand on his back. "It's okay, boy," she murmured, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to comfort more, Max or herself. The funeral director looked visibly shaken. He fumbled with his clipboard, muttering apologies under his breath. "I don't understand how this happened," he stammered. "We followed all the procedures. This shouldn't have happened." But his words offered little reassurance. The townsfolk exchanged uneasy glances, their trust in the system crumbling before their eyes. How could such a grave mistake occur? Was it really just a mix-up, or was there something darker at play? As the authorities arrived, the cemetery transformed into a makeshift investigation site. Police officers cordoned off the area with yellow tape, asking mourners to step aside. A forensics team carefully examined the coffin and its contents, taking photographs and collecting evidence. Meanwhile, Detective Harris, a seasoned investigator known for his sharp instincts, took charge of questioning the witnesses. He approached Emily first, recognizing her as Harold's niece and the one who had insisted on opening the coffin. "Miss," Detective Harris began, consulting his notepad. "Emily," she supplied quickly, her voice trembling slightly. "Emily Carter." Miss Carter, can you tell me why you requested the coffin be opened? Emily hesitated, glancing at Max, who was now sitting quietly by her side. It was Max, she admitted. He kept barking and acting strange. I thought maybe something was wrong. I couldn't ignore it. Detective Harris raised an eyebrow, intrigued. You're saying the dog alerted you? Yes, Emily replied firmly. He wouldn't stop barking. And when we opened the coffin, well, she trailed off, gesturing toward the horrifying sight behind them. The detective nodded thoughtfully. Interesting. He crouched down to examine Max, who regarded him with wary eyes. Smart dog, he remarked, scratching Max gently under the chin. Max wagged his tail faintly, though his expression remained serious. We'll need to look into this further, Detective Harris said, standing up. In the meantime, I'd like to speak with everyone involved, the funeral home staff, the family, anyone who might have information. While the investigation unfolded, whispers spread among the crowd. People speculated wildly about what could have happened. Some suggested foul play, pointing fingers at distant relatives or business associates who might have had motives to harm Harold. Others proposed far-fetched theories involving identity theft or elaborate hoaxes. One elderly woman claimed it was supernatural, a curse placed on Harold's family generations ago. Though most dismissed her theory as nonsense, the idea lingered, in the back of people's minds, fueling their unease. Back at the funeral home, the staff frantically reviewed their records, searching for answers. They confirmed that Harold's body had been delivered to them days earlier, properly identified and prepared for burial. Yet somehow, the coffin had ended up containing a different body altogether. The discrepancy baffled them. Who was the stranger? And where was Harold? Detective Harris ordered a DNA test on the remains, hoping to identify the deceased. In the meantime, he instructed the funeral home to secure all documents related to Harold's case. He also requested access to security footage from the morgue and the funeral home, though he doubted they would find anything useful. Whoever was responsible for this switch had likely covered their tracks meticulously. Emily returned home later that evening, exhausted and overwhelmed. Max followed her silently, his usual energy replaced by a subdued demeanor. She sat on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. Her mind raced with questions. Why had someone gone to such lengths to fake Harold's death? Where was her uncle now? Was he even alive? And why had Max been so adamant about the coffin? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft nudge against her leg. Looking down, she saw Max gazing up at her with those soulful eyes. She smiled weakly, scratching behind his ears. I wish you could talk, buddy, she said softly. You'd probably have all the answers. Max tilted his head, as if considering her words. Then, without warning, he trotted over to the hallway, closet, and began pawing at the door. Emily frowned, puzzled. What is it, Max? She asked, rising to her feet. She opened the closet, revealing shelves cluttered with old coats, boots, and boxes. Max sniffed eagerly at a dusty shoebox tucked away in the corner. Curious, Emily pulled it out and opened it. Inside, she found a collection of Harold's personal belongings, photographs, letters, and a small leather-bound journal. Flipping through the pages, she discovered handwritten notes detailing Harold's daily activities, along with cryptic references to a debt and someone watching. One entry caught her attention. I should never have trusted him. Now he knows too much. A chill ran down Emily's spine. Had Harold been in trouble before he died? Could these cryptic notes hold clues to his disappearance? Determined to find out, she continued reading, jotting down key details in her phone. By the time she finished, Max was lying patiently at her feet, watching her intently. It was almost as if he knew she was onto something. The next morning, armed with fresh determination, Emily decided to dig deeper. She visited the local library, poring over old newspapers and public records. She searched for any mention of Harold's name or potential enemies. After hours of research, she stumbled upon a faded article about a failed business venture involving Harold and a man named Victor Langston. According to the report, the partnership had collapsed due to financial mismanagement, leaving both parties embittered. Victor, described as ruthless and vindictive, had publicly accused Harold of betrayal and vowed revenge. Could Victor be behind the coffin switch? Emily wondered. If so, what had he hoped to achieve? More importantly, where was Harold? Now? As she left the library, Max trotted alongside her, his tail wagging faintly. For the first time since the funeral, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. With Max by her side, she resolved to uncover the truth, not just for Harold's sake, but for the entire town. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily replayed the events of the past few days in her mind. From Max's inexplicable barking to the shocking discovery at the cemetery, every moment felt like a piece of a larger puzzle. She glanced at Max, curled up at the foot of her bed, his breathing slow and steady. Despite everything, he remained steadfast, a loyal companion determined to protect his master even in death. Little did Emily know the mystery was far from over. Unbeknownst to her, Max's instincts were about to lead them both into uncharted territory, where danger lurked around every corner and the truth was far stranger than anyone could have imagined. The next morning, Emily woke up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The journal entries and the newspaper article about Victor Langston had given her a lead, albeit a shaky one. She knew that finding Harold wouldn't be easy, but she couldn't sit idly by while questions swirled unanswered. Max seemed to share her determination. He was already awake, sitting by the door with his leash in his mouth, ready to go. His unwavering loyalty gave her strength, and for the first time since arriving in town, she felt like they were a team. After grabbing a quick breakfast, Emily decided to visit Victor Langston's last known address. According to the article, he had lived on the outskirts of town, in an old farmhouse surrounded by dense woods. Though it was risky, Victor might not take kindly to unexpected visitors. Emily reasoned that if anyone could shed light on Harold's disappearance, it would be him. She packed a flashlight, some water, and a notebook before heading out, Max trotting faithfully beside her. The drive to Victor's property took longer than expected. The road grew narrower and bumpier as they ventured further away from town, eventually turning into little more than a dirt path flanked by towering trees. The sun filtered through the canopy above, casting eerie shadows on the ground. By the time they reached the farmhouse, Emily's nerves were taut. The house itself looked abandoned, its windows boarded up and paint peeling. Weeds sprouted wildly from cracks in the driveway, and the front porch sagged under the weight of neglect. Yet something about the place felt alive, not welcoming but watchful, as if it were hiding secrets. Max stiffened as they approached, his ears perked and tail rigid. He sniffed the air cautiously, emitting a low growl that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, gripping his leash tightly. Max didn't respond, instead staring intently at the house. Emily followed his gaze, scanning the dilapidated structure for any signs of movement. For a moment, everything was still. Then, just as she was about to call out, a crow cawed loudly from the roof, startling them both. Summoning her courage, Emily knocked on the splintered wooden door. The sound echoed hollowly, reverberating through the empty house. There was no answer. She tried again, louder this time, but still nothing. Frustrated, she stepped back, considering her options. Max, however, wasn't done investigating. He pulled gently on his leash, leading her toward the side of the house. Reluctantly, she followed, her heart pounding in her chest. Around the corner, they found an open window partially covered by a tattered curtain. Max stopped abruptly, barking softly. Inside, the faint scent of mildew wafted out, mingling with the earthy smell of damp wood. Emily hesitated, torn between curiosity and caution. Breaking into someone's home, even one as decrepit as this, felt wrong. But what choice did she have? If Victor was involved in Harold's disappearance, she needed answers. Taking a deep breath, she hoisted herself onto the windowsill and climbed inside, Max squeezing through after her. The interior of the house was dim and cluttered, filled with broken furniture and piles of yellowed newspapers. Dust motes floated lazily in the shafts of sunlight streaming through cracks in the walls. Emily moved carefully, avoiding loose floorboards that groaned ominously underfoot. Max stayed, close, his nose twitching as he sniffed every surface. They searched room by room, finding nothing but decay and disarray. Just as Emily began to lose hope, Max darted ahead, disappearing into what appeared to be a storage closet. "Max!" she hissed, hurrying after him. Pushing aside a stack of moldy boxes, she discovered a hidden trapdoor beneath a threadbare rug. Her pulse quickened. Why would there be a trapdoor in such an isolated, forgotten place? And why hide it so well? She glanced at Max, who sat patiently beside the door, his intelligent eyes urging her onward. Swallowing her fear, Emily pried the heavy latch open and peered into the darkness below. A narrow staircase descended into the earth, its steps creaking ominously as Emily descended. Max followed closely, his claws clicking softly against the wood. At the bottom, they entered a cramped basement lit only by the faint glow of a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. The space was cluttered with shelves stacked high with jars, tools, and other miscellaneous items. In the center of the room stood a large metal safe, its surface scratched and dented from years of use. Emily's stomach twisted. What could possibly be inside? She examined the safe closely, noticing a combination lock and a small keyhole. It was clear that opening it wouldn't be easy. Glancing around, she spotted a toolbox tucked away in the corner. Using a screwdriver, she managed to pry the lock off, though it took several frustrating minutes. Finally, with a loud click, the safe swung open. Inside, she found a collection of documents, photographs, and a single key attached to a tag labeled Cabin Number 7. Her hands trembled as she sifted through the contents. The photographs showed Harold and Victor together, their expressions tense and strained. One image depicted them arguing heatedly, their faces red with anger. Another revealed a younger Victor standing proudly in front of a remote cabin nestled deep in the woods. Emily recognized the location immediately. It matched the description in Harold's journal. Could this be the same cabin mentioned in his notes? And why had Victor kept these items locked away? Max whined softly, nudging her leg with his nose. Startled, Emily looked down at him. "You're right," she murmured. "We need to check this out." Clutching the key tightly, she led Max back upstairs and out of the house. As they drove away from Victor's property, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She checked the rear-view mirror repeatedly, half expecting to see headlights trailing behind them. But the road remained empty, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. By the time they returned to Harold's house, night had fallen. Exhausted but determined, Emily spread the documents across the kitchen table, studying them under the harsh glare of the overhead light. Max settled nearby, his head resting on his paws. His presence was comforting, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to come together. Harold's cryptic journal entries, the newspaper article about Victor, and now the evidence found in the safe, all pointed to one conclusion. Harold's disappearance was no accident. Someone had deliberately targeted him, and Victor Langston was likely involved. But why go to such lengths? Why fake Harold's death and replace his body with a stranger's? And where was Harold now? Emily's mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. She stared at the key again, tracing her fingers over the worn metal. Cabin Number 7 held the answers. She was certain of it. Whatever awaited them there, it was bound to be dangerous. Yet she couldn't turn back, not when Harold's life might depend on it. As she prepared for the journey ahead, gathering supplies and charging her phone, Emily allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. This whole ordeal had changed her, in ways she never anticipated. Before coming to town, she'd been content living a quiet, predictable life. Now she was embroiled in a mystery that tested her courage and resolve. And through it all, Max had been her constant companion, guiding her with his instincts and unwavering loyalty. Tomorrow they would set out for the cabin. Tomorrow they would face whatever dangers lay ahead. But for now, Emily closed her eyes, listening to the rhythmic sound of Max's breathing. Despite the uncertainty looming over them, she felt a flicker of hope. With Max by her side, she believed they could uncover the truth and bring Harold home. The morning air was crisp as Emily loaded the last of their supplies into the car. The sky was painted in soft hues of orange and pink, signaling the start of a new day. Yet despite the beauty of the sunrise, Emily couldn't shake the weight of what lay ahead. She glanced at Max, who sat patiently in the passenger seat, his head tilted slightly as if sensing her unease. His calm demeanor was reassuring, but she knew this journey wouldn't be easy. Cabin number 7 was located deep in the Yao woods, far from any signs of civilization. If something went wrong, there would be no one to help them. Before leaving, Emily double-checked the map she had printed the night before. It wasn't much, just a rough sketch based on the photograph of Victor standing in front of the cabin, but it was enough to give her a general idea of where to go. She also packed essentials: water bottles, energy bars, a flashlight, matches, and a first aid kit. Her phone was fully charged, though she doubted she'd get reception once they entered the dense forest. Still, she tucked it into her pocket, along with the key to cabin number 7. Taking one final look at Harold's house, she climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The drive to the edge of the woods was uneventful, but as they veered off the main road onto a narrow dirt path, the atmosphere shifted. Towering trees loomed overhead, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. The air grew cooler, carrying with it the earthy scent of moss and damp leaves. Birds chirped faintly in the distance, their songs muffled by the thick underbrush. Every sound seemed amplified, making Emily hyper-aware of her surroundings. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles turning white. After about 20 minutes, the road disappeared entirely, forcing Emily to park the car and continue on foot. She secured Max's leash and slung the backpack over her shoulder, taking a deep breath before stepping into the wilderness. The forest was eerily quiet, save for the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Max walked beside her, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. He seemed alert, but not alarmed, which gave Emily some comfort. If danger lurked nearby, Max would know. They followed the map as best they could, using landmarks like a fallen tree or a cluster of boulders to guide them. Progress was slow. The terrain was uneven and roots snaked across the ground, threatening to trip them at every step. After nearly an hour of hiking, Emily began to worry they were lost. Just as doubt crept in, Max stopped abruptly, tugging at his leash. He barked softly, pointing his nose toward a narrow trail barely visible through the foliage. Emily squinted, noticing a faded sign nailed to a tree. Cabin number 7 was scrawled on it in peeling paint. Her heart skipped a beat. They were close. Following the trail, they pushed deeper into the woods until the trees thinned slightly, revealing a small clearing. In the center stood the cabin, a weathered structure with chipped paint and a sagging roof. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, indicating someone had been there recently. Emily froze, her pulse racing. Was Harold inside? Or was it someone else? Someone dangerous? Max growled low in his throat, his body tense. Emily knelt beside him, whispering, "Stay close, okay?" He responded with a soft whine, pressing against her leg. Slowly they approached the cabin, each step deliberate and cautious. The door was slightly ajar, creaking faintly in the breeze. Emily hesitated, then pushed it open just wide enough to slip inside, Max following closely behind. The interior was dimly lit, the only light coming from cracks in the boarded-up windows. Dust covered every surface and the air smelled stale, as though the place hadn't been cleaned in years. Furniture was sparse: a rickety table, 2 chairs, and a cot in the corner. On the far side of the room, Emily noticed a trapdoor partially concealed beneath a threadbare rug. Her stomach churned. Why did everything lead back to hidden spaces? She moved toward the trapdoor, her movements slow and deliberate. Max stayed glued to her side, his ears perked and tail rigid. As she knelt to examine it, she heard a faint noise, a shuffle followed by the sound of breathing. Someone, or something, was down there, Her mind raced. Should she open it? What if it was a trap? But she had come too far to turn back now. Summoning her courage, she grabbed the handle and pulled. The trapdoor swung open with a groan, revealing a set of steep wooden stairs descending into darkness. Emily hesitated, glancing at Max. He stared back, his expression unreadable but resolute. Taking a deep breath, she descended, one hand gripping the railing while the other held the flashlight. At the bottom, she found herself in a cramped underground room. The beam of her flashlight revealed shelves stocked with canned goods, tools, and other supplies. But it was the figure tied to a chair in the center of the room that made her gasp. "Harold!" she cried, rushing forward. It was him, pale, weak, and gaunt, but unmistakably Harold. His wrists were bound with rope and duct tape covered his mouth. His eyes widened in shock as he saw her, tears streaming down his face. Emily quickly untied, him pulling the tape free. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. I'm alive," Harold croaked, his voice hoarse from disuse. "But we're not safe yet." Before Emily could respond, a shadow moved in the corner of the room. A man stepped into the light, holding a knife. It was Victor Langston. His face was twisted with rage, his eyes cold and calculating. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his tone venomous. "This is none of your business." Emily instinctively stepped in front of Harold, shielding him with her body. Max growled fiercely, his hackles raised as he positioned himself between them and Victor. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with hostility. For a moment, no one moved. Then, without warning, Max lunged at Victor, sinking his teeth into the man's arm. Victor screamed, dropping the knife as he tried to shake Max off. The distraction gave Emily just enough time to grab a nearby shovel and swing it at Victor, knocking him unconscious. Breathing heavily, Emily turned to Harold, who was still sitting on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. "We need to get out of here," she said firmly. Helping him to his feet, they hurried up the stairs and out of the cabin, Max trotting proudly beside them. Once outside, Emily called the authorities, explaining everything that had happened. Within the hour, police arrived to arrest Victor and secure the scene. As they drove back to town, Harold recounted the events leading up to his capture. Victor had ambushed him at his house, faking his death to cover up the kidnapping. He had planned to use Harold as leverage in a scheme involving stolen money, but things had spiraled out of control. Thanks to Max's instincts and Emily's determination, Harold was finally free. By the time they returned home, the entire town was buzzing with news of the rescue. Neighbors gathered outside Harold's house, cheering and clapping as he stepped out of the car. Max basked in the attention, wagging his tail furiously. Everyone agreed. Max wasn't just a loyal companion, he was a hero. That night, as Emily sat on the porch with Harold and Max, she reflected on everything they had been through. The journey had tested her courage, resolve, and faith in humanity. But it had also reminded her of the power of loyalty and love. And as she watched Max curl up at Harold's feet, she knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, the truest heroes walk on four legs. The days following Harold's rescue were a whirlwind of activity. News of the dramatic event spread quickly through the small town, turning what had been a somber occasion into a story of triumph and survival. Neighbors who had once only nodded politely at Harold now greeted him warmly, eager to hear his side of the story. Reporters from nearby cities arrived, setting up cameras and microphones outside his modest home, hoping to capture an exclusive interview. But Harold, still recovering from his ordeal, preferred to stay indoors with Emily and Max by his side. Max, on the other hand, seemed to revel in the newfound attention. Strangers stopped by daily to pat his head or slip him treats, calling him the hero dog, and marveling at his instincts. Children especially adored him, often asking if they could play fetch or simply sit beside him while he lounged lazily in the yard. For a scruffy mutt who had spent most of his life quietly shadowing Harold, this sudden fame was both amusing and overwhelming. Yet despite all the fuss, Max remained steadfastly loyal to Harold, never straying far from his master's side, For Harold, he was slowly regaining his strength. Though physically weak from weeks of captivity, his spirit was unbroken. Over cups of tea shared with Emily, he recounted the harrowing details of his abduction. Victor Langston, it turned out, had harbored a grudge against Harold for years, stemming from their failed business partnership. When Victor discovered that Harold still possessed documents implicating him in illegal activities, he saw an opportunity, not just to silence Harold, but to stage his death and disappear completely. Victor's plan had been meticulous. He drugged Harold one evening, making it appear as though he'd suffered a heart attack. Then, using connections within the funeral industry, he arranged for Harold's body to be swapped with that of an unidentified stranger. The real Harold was taken to cabin number 7, where Victor kept him tied up and isolated. For weeks, Harold endured psychological torment, unsure whether anyone would ever find him or even believe he was alive. It was like living in a nightmare, Harold confessed, his voice trembling. Every day I thought about you, Emily, and wondered if you'd figure it out. And then there was Max. He paused, smiling faintly as he glanced at the dog curled up at his feet. Even when I couldn't see him, I felt his presence somehow, like he was watching over me. Emily listened intently, her heart aching for her uncle. She couldn't imagine the fear and loneliness he must have felt during those dark days. But she also marveled at how everything had fallen into place. The cryptic notes in Harold's journal, the evidence hidden in Victor's safe, and above all, Max's relentless determination to lead them to the truth. It was as if fate itself had conspired to bring them together. Meanwhile, Detective Harris worked tirelessly to piece together the rest of the puzzle. With Victor under arrest and facing multiple charges, including kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy, Harris focused on uncovering the full extent of his crimes. During a search of Victor's property, investigators discovered additional evidence linking him to other unsolved cases in the region. Documents, stolen goods, and even recordings of incriminating conversations painted a chilling picture of a man driven by greed and revenge. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came when forensic experts identified the body found in Harold's coffin. The stranger turned out to be a missing person whose disappearance had baffled authorities months earlier. Victor had apparently killed him during a botched robbery attempt, then used the body to fake Harold's death. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community, leaving many wondering how such evil could exist so close to home. Despite the grim revelations, the town rallied around Harold and Emily. Friends brought meals, neighbors offered to help with repairs around the house, and local businesses donated supplies to aid in Harold's recovery. One particularly generous resident organized a fundraiser to cover medical expenses, ensuring Harold wouldn't face financial hardship after everything he'd been through. The outpouring of support was overwhelming, reminding everyone of the power of community in times of crisis. For Emily, the experience had changed her profoundly. Before coming to town, she had viewed her visits to Harold as little more than obligatory family obligations. Now she realized how much she had underestimated the bond they shared, and how much she had missed out on by keeping her distance. In the weeks that followed, she made plans to visit more often, vowing to strengthen their relationship. She also promised herself to listen more closely to her instincts, crediting them for guiding her through the investigation. Max, too, seemed different. Though outwardly the same scruffy golden-brown mutt, there was an undeniable air of confidence about him. Whether it was the way he carried himself or the knowing glint in his eyes, it was clear that Max understood his role in saving Harold's life. He basked in the admiration of strangers, yet remained humble in his devotion to those he loved. To Emily, he was no longer just a pet. He was a partner, a protector, and a friend. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, Emily sat with Harold and Max on the porch. The air was cool, carrying with it the scent of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. Fireflies danced lazily in the twilight, their soft glow adding a touch of magic to the scene. Harold leaned back in his chair, sipping a cup of tea, while Max dozed contentedly at their feet. You know, Harold said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I've been thinking about writing a book." "A book?" Emily asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," Harold replied with a chuckle. "About all this. About Max. About how sometimes the smallest acts of loyalty can make the biggest difference. Maybe it'll inspire people to appreciate the ones they love before it's too late." Emily smiled, nodding in agreement. "That's a great idea. People need stories like yours, stories that remind us of hope, resilience, and the goodness in the world." Harold patted Max gently on the head. "And let's not forget the real star of the show," he added, laughing softly. Max opened one eye lazily, wagging his tail as if acknowledging the compliment. As the night deepened, the three of them sat together, basking in the quiet joy of being reunited. For Harold, it was a second chance, a chance to rebuild his life and reconnect with the people who mattered most. For Emily, it was an opportunity to rediscover the importance of family and trust. And for Max, it was proof that his unwavering loyalty had truly saved the day. Yet even as they celebrated their victory, none of them could shake the lingering sense that danger still lurked in the shadows. While Victor was behind bars and justice had been served, the scars left by his actions would take time to heal. The town, once so peaceful and predictable, now bore the weight of secrets uncovered and lives forever altered. But amidst the uncertainty, one thing remained constant: the unbreakable bond between Harold, Emily, and Max. It was a bond forged through adversity, strengthened by courage, and sealed with love. And as they gazed out at the star-filled sky, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a team, united by the extraordinary journey that had brought them closer than ever before. In the weeks that followed Harold's rescue, life in the small town began to settle back into its usual rhythm. The initial frenzy of reporters and curious onlookers gradually faded, leaving behind a sense of quiet gratitude. People went about their daily routines, but the events surrounding Harold's disappearance and Max's heroic role in uncovering the truth remained fresh in everyone's minds. Conversations at the grocery store, coffee shop, or park inevitably turned to the story, with each retelling adding new layers of admiration for the scruffy dog who had refused to give up on his master. For Harold, recovery was slow but steady. He spent his days resting, eating hearty meals prepared by neighbors and taking short walks around the yard with Max trotting happily beside him. Though physically weaker than before, his spirit remained unshaken. Each morning, he would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun rise over the hills and reflecting on how close he had come to losing everything. Yet instead of dwelling on bitterness or fear, Harold chose to focus on gratitude. For Emily, for Max, and for the community that had rallied around him during his darkest hour. Max, too, seemed to have found a renewed sense of purpose. His fame continued to grow as word of his heroics spread beyond the town limits. A local newspaper published an article titled, "The Dog Who Saved His Master," complete with photos of Max standing proudly next to Harold. Soon after, a children's author reached out to Emily asking if she could write a book inspired by Max's story. The idea delighted Harold, who saw it as a way to share not only Max's bravery, but also the lessons they had all learned about loyalty, trust, and resilience. As plans for the book took shape, Emily found herself stepping into a new role, not just as Harold's niece, but as a storyteller determined to honor her uncle's experience. She spent hours interviewing Harold, jotting down notes and piecing together the fragments of his ordeal into a cohesive narrative. Max, ever the eager participant, would curl up at her feet during these sessions, occasionally lifting his head, as if to approve certain details. It was clear that this wasn't just Harold's story, it belonged to all three of them. But while the town celebrated their triumph, shadows still lingered in the corners of their lives. Victor Langston's arrest may have brought justice, but it also exposed unsettling truths about human nature. The documents recovered from his property revealed connections to other crimes, implicating individuals whose names were whispered in hushed tones throughout the region. Detective Harris warned Harold and Emily to remain vigilant, cautioning that some people might seek revenge for Victor's downfall. For now, though, the threat felt distant, a storm cloud hovering far away on the horizon. To ensure their safety, Harold installed security cameras around the house and kept a phone line open to the police station. Neighbors volunteered to keep watch, promising to report anything suspicious. Emily stayed longer than planned, unwilling to leave until she was certain Harold was fully recovered. Together they transformed the house into a fortress of warmth and protection, where laughter and love outweighed any lingering fears. One crisp, autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled in the breeze, the town held a special ceremony to honor Max's bravery. The event was organized by the mayor and drew a crowd larger than anyone expected. Children carried handmade banners praising Max, while adults clapped and cheered as Harold led his faithful companion onto the makeshift stage set up in the town square. Max wore a bright blue ribbon around his neck, tied neatly in a bow, and wagged his tail furiously as the crowd erupted in applause. Harold stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "When I think about what happened," he began, "I realize how lucky I am to be alive, to have family who cares, and most importantly, to have Max." He paused, looking down at the dog sitting obediently by his side. "Max didn't just save my life. He reminded us all of something we sometimes forget, that loyalty and love are the strongest forces in the world." The audience erupted in cheers again, many wiping tears from their eyes. At the end of the ceremony, the mayor presented Max with an official certificate declaring him an honorary citizen of the town. Emily snapped photos, laughing as Max posed proudly for the camera, his tongue lolling out in a wide grin. That evening, as the festivities wound down, Harold, Emily, and Max returned home to find a surprise waiting for them. On the dining table sat a stack of letters addressed to Max, sent by people from across the country who had read about his story online. Some thanked him for inspiring them to cherish their own pets more deeply. Others shared tales of their own loyal animals, hoping to add their voices to the chorus of praise. One letter stood out, a child's crayon drawing of a dog barking at a coffin, accompanied by a note that read, "Thank you for being brave. My dog is my best friend too." Touched by the outpouring of kindness, Harold decided to frame several of the letters and hang them on the living room wall, creating a tribute to Max's legacy. Emily helped him arrange them alongside photos of Max taken during the ceremony, turning the space into a gallery of gratitude and joy. Every time they passed through the room, they couldn't help but smile at the reminder of how much one dog had meant to so many. As winter approached, bringing snowflakes that dusted the rooftops and frosted the trees, Harold began working on his own writing project. With Emily's encouragement, he started drafting a memoir chronicling his life with Max, from their first meeting on the side of the road to the harrowing events that had tested their bond. Writing became a form of therapy for Harold, allowing him to process the trauma of his captivity while celebrating the moments of light that had carried him through. Max, ever patient, sat faithfully by Harold's desk as he typed away, occasionally nudging his hand for attention. When Harold grew tired, they would take long naps together on the couch, wrapped in blankets and surrounded by the comforting hum of normalcy. For the first time in months, Harold felt truly at peace. By spring, both the book and the children's story inspired by Max were nearing completion. The publisher predicted they would be well received, particularly among readers seeking stories of hope and resilience. Meanwhile, Max continued to live his best life, enjoying belly rubs, stolen socks, and endless games of fetch. He had earned his place as a local legend, but to Harold and Emily he was simply their beloved companion, the heart and soul of their little family. On a sunny Saturday morning, Harold, Emily, and Max gathered in the backyard to plant a tree in honor of their journey. They chose a sturdy oak sapling, its roots strong and its branches reaching skyward. As they patted the soil firmly around its base, Harold smiled. "This tree represents us," he said. "No matter how hard the winds blow, we'll stand tall together." Emily nodded, wrapping an arm around her uncle's shoulders. Max barked once, as if in agreement, then flopped onto the grass, content to bask in the sunshine. Life had thrown them challenges, but they had faced them head-on, with courage, determination, and above all, love. And as the years passed, the oak tree grew taller and stronger, mirroring the enduring bond between Harold, Emily, and Max. Their story became a part of the town's history, told and retold to future generations. But for those who lived it, the memory of that remarkable dog and the extraordinary events he set into motion would always hold a special place in their hearts. Because sometimes the greatest heroes aren't the ones who wear capes. They're the ones who bark loudly when something feels wrong, who refuse to let go even in the face of danger, and who remind us that true loyalty knows no bounds.